Since passions can be paired with the calmest reflection, it is easy to see that they are not thoughtless, like affects, or stormy and transitory. Rather, they take root and can even coexist with rationalizing. It is also easy to see that they do the greatest damage to freedom. And if affect is drunkenness, then passion is an illness that abhors all medicine, and it is therefore far worse than all those transitory emotions, that at least stir up the resolution to be better. Instead, passion is an enchantment that also refuses recuperation. Immanuel Kant. As previously announced, I want to discuss what, according to Kant, leads to a happy life. And the main source of a happy life to him is independence. So his recipe is more of a negative than a positive recipe. He's not so much saying you need something that you need to acquire in order to be happy. Rather, mostly he is saying you need to get rid of something. You need to not have something in order to be happy. And that thing that you don't need to have is dependency. Now, dependency on what? Well, really any sort of dependency. The more dependent you are, the less free you are, and the more reasons or possibilities for being unhappy you have. So, on the one hand, Kant is talking about desires for having certain things and about being independent of such things and of those desires for your happiness. That is something I will address in an upcoming lecture. But on the other hand, Kant is also talking about being independent of yourself in a way, being independent of your own psyche and what's going on inside your own psyche. And that is what I want to get into here. Now, I already said in the previous lecture that in Kant's philosophy, most of the time, morality and prudence actually align. Meaning the same thing that is your moral duty anyways, most of the time a duty towards yourself, because in Kant's moral philosophy, we don't just have duties towards other people, we also have a duty to treat ourselves in a certain manner. Namely, we have a duty to preserve and, if we can, to expand our own freedom. We have a duty to revere our own humanity and actually live as human beings, not sink to the level of an animal or not objectify ourselves, but rather live with dignity. All of that I discussed in a lecture on the duties towards oneself. And as I previously said, that which is your duty, your moral duty anyways, most of the time, according to Kant, is also the same thing that prudence would advise you to do for your own benefit. And that I want to remind you of at the start of this whole lecture, because it will apply to pretty much anything I will be saying. Being a slave to your own affections and passions is immoral to Kant. It is undignified and means throwing yourself away. But also at the same time, it is not prudent. It is a path that can only lead to unhappiness. So both for your own benefit, for your own happiness in life, or if not for your active positive happiness, then at least negatively for preventing unhappiness, but also at the same time for your dignity as a human being, you should learn some sort of self-governing and self-discipline, and you should bring some sort of harmony into your own psyche, into your own feelings and desires and so on. And as Kant says, who is influenced by the ancient Stoics, you should, or by ancient philosophy in general, really, could also be the Cynics or the Epicureans. He says you should, to some degree, treat yourself as sort of a stranger. That is, you should, to some degree, be hard on yourself. Now, to get more into this, specifically Kant, till now I just talked about the psyche and what's going on in your psyche. Specifically, he talks about the affections and the passions. These we should be independent of. These we should ideally not have at all. Again, both prudence and the moral law say this and agree on this. These two concepts, also their names, specifically affections and passions, Kant takes up from Hutcheson. He is influenced by several British authors and the British moral sense theory and so on. And here he is influenced by Hutcheson, who already before Kant wrote about the passions and the affections. However, Kant is not simply taking up what Hutcheson has to say, but rather he is giving this an interpretation and thoughts of his own. And if you ask what are affections and passions to him, you have to remember that the what he calls Gemüt in German, what you could maybe translate as mind or maybe as psyche, has three parts. This is something I discussed in several of my previous lectures. You can go back to the lecture on the project of the critique of reason. To him, we have a faculty of cognition. Then we have the feeling. And feeling to Kant is always a feeling of pleasure and displeasure. There is no sort of neutral feeling. A feeling always is, at least to some degree, pleasurable or painful. And third, we have the desiring faculty. And the affections belong to the feeling. They are a specific kind of feelings. And the passions belong to the faculty of desiring. So they are desires. Both affections and passions, however, are very strong feelings or strong desires that sort of make us forget all the other feelings or all the other desires. So let's start with the affections first, about which Kant has to say a little less than about the passions. Now, as I just said, the affection is a particularly strong feeling to Kant. And if that definition or description sounds a bit vague, one way to recognize it is that Kant says an affection is a feeling so strong that you cannot hide it. Right? So if you don't realize that a person has a certain affection, then he does not, in fact, have that affection. So consider, for example, someone can, of course, be sad on the inside, but outwardly can still try to hold back the tears. If that works, he may be sad, but he does not have the affection of sadness or of deep mourning or something like that. Only if he is sobbing uncontrollably, then there's the affection. or consider someone getting angry. In some situation, you can maybe hold back your anger and try to outwardly still appear chill, still seem to be smiling. Then you might have anger, but you're not truly getting mad as an affection. If, however, you start screaming and your head gets all red from the screaming, or you start attacking someone out of anger, then what you have is the affection. Or likewise, you might find something funny, but because it's a serious situation, you have to hold back your laughter. But if you cannot help but laughing loudly and uncontrollably, again, then you have the affection. And these affections, Kant says, because they are such a strong feeling, they make us unable to compare this particular feeling with the sum of all our other feelings. Which, by the way, reminds me of the philosophy of my dad, where there's a difference between primary feelings and secondary feelings, and too many people are too focused on their sensitivities, on the outer secondary feeling that is created by the moment, by outside forces, by how we are affected. And too many people fail to hold on to the inner primary feeling, which they create themselves. So, for example, you're together with someone, you're in a relationship, your primary feeling should be the love for that person. Now, maybe the person does something to annoy you, maybe just a small thing, and now you get annoyed or angry. As a secondary feeling, as a outer sensitivity. And many people, instead of just sort of ignoring that secondary feeling and reminding themselves, one moment, now this person might be annoying in this moment, but I actually still love that person. Many get lost in or get carried away by these secondary sensitivities, even to the point they lose contact to their primary feeling altogether. For example, breaking up then. But what Kant himself says, his most favorite example is a rich man who has some expensive cup or chalice, and some servant of his accidentally breaks that cup. And the rich man now getting angry, screaming at the servant, and so on. Here Kant says, okay, sure, the cup was expensive, so it breaking is a loss. Of course, you're not supposed to be happy about it. But if you're rich, you could compare the displeasure you feel over the cup breaking with your overall feelings in life. You could consider, hey, I'm still rich, I'm still sitting in a mansion, I'm still eating very exquisite food right now. I'm still having servants attending to me. In fact, maybe in the other room in the cupboard, I have like 100 other expensive cups still left. And considering how much money I have, this loss doesn't really matter. It's not like I will really feel this loss of money. So if you are able to compare one singular feeling you have with all the feelings you have, or with your whole life situation, then you do not have an affection. But the affection, in this case the anger, is a feeling so strong that once again it makes you unable to compare and weigh this feeling with all your other feelings. And this obviously is something that is very unaufklärt, right? It all comes down to Aufklärung, so what is falsely translated as enlightenment. The thing is, with Aufklärung, people hear that it is about thinking for yourself, leading yourself, not following others. But they think this is just about other people, not letting other people lead you. But more often than not, it is actually about not being led by sensuality, by your own sensuality, by your own feelings, your own desires, because you're supposed as an aufklärt person to lead yourself through reason. That is to think, to reflect, not to be carried away by your feelings. And the unaufklärt person, therefore, always is a prisoner of the moment, I keep emphasizing. Because, after all, your sensuality only gives you the moment, right? Your senses can only give you whatever affects you in that very moment. So going back to the example of the rich man, what he sees, what he hears in that very moment is the cup breaking. Maybe he has another 100 cups in the other room in the cupboard, but he doesn't see them right now. Maybe he has 1 billion on his bank account, but he doesn't see that right now. Now, again, the aufklärt person is not a slave to his sensuality. He can think. And thinking is the only way you can get out of the present moment, right? The past, the future, anything that isn't there right now in front of you, affecting you, is only accessible through thinking. The senses always just give you the moment. So if you're a slave to the senses, then you are a slave to the moment. And that shouldn't be. So as an aufklärt person, a person who guides himself through reason, you will be much more calm and have less affections. Right? I can say I just recently I did get something broken, and I'm in fact not a rich person with 100 other cups in my cupboard. I did get something broken, and not the most unimportant thing, not the thing that mattered least to me. I did get that broken by someone, and while I was, of course, not happy about it, I stayed calm. I did not scream at that person or whatever, because why? I mean, apart from making myself and that person even more unhappy, screaming would not mend the shards back together. So what's the point? And if I consider my overall life and also the other things I own that have not yet been broken, then I'm still rather fine. So, and this is what reason is all about, after all. I already gave an earlier lecture, what does reason mean to Kant? And there I explained that to him, reason is the faculty that considers the whole, or the general, or even the universal, and that deduces the particular, the singular, from the whole. Right? Like when I say in a syllogism, when I say all human beings are mortal, that's a general statement. And now from that, I deduce, since Socrates is a human being, he too is mortal, then that is reasonable. Then that is a rational conclusion. And so therefore, if reason deduces the particular from the universal, and now the affection is defined as, once again, a feeling, so something particular, that makes us unable to compare it with the sum of our feelings, so to compare it with the whole, then we see that the affection makes us irrational, that the affection is something unaufklärt. The aufklärt person starts from the sum of all his feelings and will not give a single particular momentary feeling more importance than it really has considered against this sum. And therefore, the affections to Kant are always a foolishness. And I already mentioned in previous lectures, like on wisdom and on the imperatives, what Kant has to say about foolishness. To him, it means that you are defeating your own purpose, right? So the greedy, stingy person is a fool because he wants to have lots of money. Therefore, he never spends money. He lives like a poor person in order to be rich. That's foolish. Why be rich if you don't use it? If you live like a poor person anyway, you could just be poor in the first place. So the affections are also foolish because they defeat their own purpose. This can be shown easily with the affection of anger. So, for example, I read a while ago, there was a court case here in Germany where someone got sentenced to some years in prison, I think for violently attacking someone. And that criminal, when the judge passed the sentence, got so angry that he jumped forward and attacked the judge and even bit him before guards came rushing in and dragged him away from the judge. And clearly, this is a good example of how morality and prudence align. Because clearly, out of this affection of anger, attacking the judge and biting him, hurting him, is immoral. But at the same time, even if you weren't a moral person, and probably if this guy had been a moral person, he would not have been in court in the first place, even if you're only thinking of your own self-interest, you still should not do this immoral action, because not only is it immoral, it is also clearly not prudent. I mean, what was he thinking? That the judge will say, oh, you just attacked me, you just bit me, now I'm gonna change the sentence that I just passed, now I'm gonna let you go free. If you thought about it rationally, you would have to come to the conclusion that you will only make things worse for yourself. You will probably now stay in prison even longer. But of course, the answer is that the person was not thinking at all. The person was not a human being in that moment. He was a wild animal. His rationality had been completely turned off by that affection of anger. But it's equally true for other affections. So, for example, if you are scared in the face of danger, when the fear is not just your heart is pounding or whatever, but rises to the level of an affection, then you might freeze up, or you might panic and run around senselessly, screaming. And thereby, whatever is attacking you, whatever is hunting you, might actually get you because you froze up or because through your screaming you alerted it. So through that affection of being scared, of being in panic, you actually brought the danger up in yourself of which you were afraid. Or take embarrassment, for example. Take shame. Let's say you are talking to your crush, but you are embarrassed. That very embarrassment will now make you awkward. You will now not be able to talk to your crush normally, but rather you will fumble your words, you will say something dumb, and so on, and thereby have a reason to actually be embarrassed, right? Likewise, if you are embarrassed about being on a stage or speaking in public in front of people, and that very feeling now makes you forget your lines, now makes you get clumsy and stumble or whatever. So if you had not been embarrassed, then you would have acted normally and there would have been no reason to feel ashamed. Now that very embarrassment makes you actually act in an embarrassing manner, that makes the embarrassment retroactively justified in a way. And even too strong to uncontrolled happiness, which is also an affection, of course, can be dangerous, Kant says. He compares it with a greyhound that you keep not outside but in your room, where it just causes chaos and knocks over all the cups and destroys all the dishware. So the affection is in a way self-defeating. So what to do about it? Well, Kant suggests suspending your judgments. He suggests holding back for a time. So, for example, he gives the advice, if you get a letter that makes you angry, then you don't have to answer that letter immediately, because then you will ride out of anger and maybe not be tactful, maybe say something insulting, and thereby only make things worse. No one is keeping you from first going for a walk, Kant says, or even waiting a day or two before answering that letter when you have calmed down and can think more straight. And this, in fact, is very much analogous to Kant's skeptical method. This method is something I discussed in its own lecture previously. And it is, of course, a method mostly for cognition, for finding the truth. The method is meant to fight prejudices. Because, I mean, a prejudice is literally that, right? Previous to actually looking at the thing at hand, you already made your judgment. The skeptical method is about exactly not doing that, but rather suspending your judgment and first collecting data, collecting evidence, looking at things. So behaving like a judge should behave. You should not just say right away, oh, I'm sure that guy there is guilty, but rather should take his time to listen to all the evidence, to hear all the witnesses, and so on. And while this method is mostly meant for finding truth, and I discussed it as such in its own lecture, here you can see that that very same method or that very same attitude applied to practical matters, right? So again, suspending your judgment, not acting immediately, first calming down, can also be helpful, can be a very prudent way to not get carried away by your affections. What I myself often suggest to people is thinking about how they will feel about something in the future. Because as I said, the unoff-cleared person is a slave to his senses, and the senses make you be a prisoner of the moment, because the moment is all you can sense. So go out of the moment and ask yourself, in 10 years, or even in 1 year, or even just next week, will I still care about this matter? Will I even still remember that matter, right? Like, there are so many small things in everyday life that make you get annoyed, or maybe you get angry, like these small fights that you have with your partner or with a friend, or getting angry at someone on the street in traffic. If you thought about it, if you abstracted a bit from this specific moment, you would probably find in most cases that a week later you won't even remember what you were angry at. So if it's that insignificant, why be angry about it now, right? So, for example, often I would tell students that were afraid because of some class and test, like maybe some 8th grader that has an upcoming vocabulary test is stressing over his grade. I would tell him, look, I failed at some vocabulary tests in 8th grade. Do you think I remember a single one of them? Like, looking back nowadays, I can't remember a single grade I had in a vocabulary test, whether it's a good or a bad grade. And even just by the time in 12th grade, when I graduated, when I finished high school, even then, looking back, do you think I remembered some weekly vocabulary tests in 8th grade? Like, this grade does not matter at all. It's simply not rational to stress about it. I got many 4s or 5s in 8th grade. So here the system is the best grade is an 1 and the worst is a 6, right? So 1 is like an A and 6 is like an F. So 4 or 5 is bad grades. Yeah, I got many of those in 8th grade in vocabulary tests because I didn't bother to study for them. And then still I graduated high school with a 1, so with the best grade. It really does not matter, I would tell this student. Now, if you come home and you get a message that your parents both died in a car crash, okay, you can be sad about that. Because presumably if that happened, it would be something that even in 10 years you would still remember. But in 10 years, you will not remember this vocabulary test. So if it's not important then clearly it's not important now, right? Something either is or it isn't important. Time doesn't change that. So just don't care about something now in the present that if you reflect on it, you yourself will have to admit you won't care about then in the future. But with that, let's go from the affections over to the passions. Those Kant considers much worse. Sickness, even close to insanity. The passion, as I already said, belongs not to the faculty of feeling pleasure and displeasure, but rather it belongs to the faculty of desiring. So the passion is a sort of desire, just like the affection is a sort of feeling. But just like the affection makes you focus on only that one feeling and forget about all your other feelings, just like that, the passion is a desire that makes you unable to compare it with the sum of all your other desires. So it is something exclusively negative. That's important for me to emphasize because nowadays passion has a better connotation, right? When you say you're passionate about something nowadays, it means doing it with a certain inner fire, and it's considered a good thing. Apart from that, passion nowadays has a very much sexual connotation, right? And again, that's considered a good thing, being lost in passion. But this is a relatively new development. And not just Kant, but pretty much all the great thinkers would be very surprised or even shocked to hear that. For the longest time, passions were considered something bad that you should not have. I mean, it is in the very word. Passion is related to passive, right? So you are not master of yourself. You are overcome by this passion, by this strong desire, and cannot think straight anymore, cannot control yourself anymore. So, for example, take someone who hates passionately and who wants to take revenge to the level of a passion. He may have other desires also, like, for example, being free. But if the hatred, if the lust for revenge become a passion, he forgets these other desires. And he will probably murder that person, not even thinking about how he will go to jail and ruin his own life. Or think of someone who is infatuated. And to Kant, love is fine. Love is not a passion. Maybe a strong feeling, but it is not a passion. But infatuation is something we should always avoid, because that to him is a passion. That is always irrational and unaufklärt. So when people say that love blinds you, Kant would actually say that no, actual love does not blind you. Actual love goes together with seeing. But infatuation, that indeed blinds you. And here too, if you think about this passion, if you're completely obsessed with that other person, you may completely forget about and disregard your other desires. Like you may stop eating, or you may spend all your money trying to impress that person, trying to buy gifts for that person. You may go mad with infatuation. If that person chooses somebody else, maybe you kill that person or that other person that he chose. Or maybe you kill yourself because now you can't have that person of your dreams. So the passion of infatuation again makes you disregard all your other desires. And the passions, they are much more dangerous as the affections because they have more permanence. The affection is just in the moment. Kant compares the affection with a brief storm that causes flooding, that causes a river going over its banks. Surely it's a problem, surely it can be dangerous, but after a while it will be over and the water will go away again. On the other hand, the passion, he says, is like a constant stream downwards a steep slope. It never ends, and it takes everything in its way and washes it away. Or also he says the affection is like a short intoxication, like when you took some drug, when you drank alcohol, while on the other hand, the passion is like a poison that constantly harms and weakens you till you die from it. If you have a passion, you're also a fool, but of a different kind. And I already talked about this in a previous lecture when I discussed the foolishness, that in German we have two different words, Narr and Tor, which both get translated as fool into English. And Narr is closer to fool because it is also the word, just like the English fool that we would use for the jester, like at a king's court. And to Kant, Narr is the person who is not prudent, the person who defeats his own purpose, who is acting irrational, not just in his aims, but even in his means, which is exactly what the affections lead to, right? And the word Tor to Kant is a different kind of foolishness. It means someone not who is not prudent, but who is not wise, meaning who is maybe rational in his means, right? He can still use his reason as an instrument to reach whatever his purpose is, but he's irrational in his purpose. He does not use his reason to ask himself, should this even be my goal? And that's the problem with the passions, and that's actually what makes the passions more dangerous than the affections. You do not lose your reason altogether. You can still use your reason, but only in service, only as an instrument of your passion. But you do not use your reason to question that passion as such, right? So, for example, once again, if you passionately hate someone or want to take revenge on someone, then maybe you can hide that hatred. Maybe you can actually act friendly. Maybe you can try to befriend that person, so that person thinks that he's safe, and you can hatch some elaborate plan on how to take revenge and stab the person in the back when he least expects it. So you go about this goal of revenge in a very rational manner. You're not like some blind animal that just jumps on him aggressively and tries to attack him head on. But of course, the goal of revenge as such is not a rational goal. So therefore, the passions can be more dangerous to others, since they can be hidden away, right? I said previously that the affection is actually defined by Kant as a feeling so strong that you cannot hide it. So if you get angry with someone to the degree that it is an affection and you actually attack that person, wanting to beat him up or maybe attack him with a knife to stab him, sure, you do pose a danger, but maybe you can be forked off, and maybe this direct attack out of blind aggression in the end is less dangerous than if you hate that person with a passion and you hide that hatred away and you secretly work on a plan to ruin that person's life. But of course, once again, the passion is not just immoral because it might hurt others. It is also even mostly immoral because it is against the duties towards yourself. It simply does not befit the dignity of a human being, of a rational being, to be so occupied with a passion, to be so obsessed with one singular desire. Indeed, Kant calls the passion the cancer of practical reason. And with passions in particular, he says it's best to not let them develop at all. Because once you have a passion, it's almost impossible to get rid of it again. It's easier to get rid of affections than passions. And that is not because it is impossible in itself to get rid of a passion, but the passion is permanent, right? Again, the image is a steady stream downwards a steep hill, not just flooding for a time after a storm. So with the affection, okay, you might lose your reason for a moment while this affection lasts. So, for example, while you are angry and aggressively screaming at someone, you cannot be reasoned with, of course. But after the anger goes away, then maybe you can be reasoned with. And maybe such a person with such affections could, in a calm moment, see reason and be convinced that he has anger issues, that he should work on it, he should go to therapy for, or whatever. On the other hand, if you have a passion, there is no moment where you are not afflicted by your passion. The passion is there all the time. Maybe you can outwardly hide it, but it is always there. And so there's no moment when you have reason. Again, you have reason only as an instrument in service to your passion, but your reason cannot, so to say, emancipate itself from that passion. Which is why Kant says preaching morality to a passionate person is as useless as preaching happiness to a slave on the galleys. Because this person is equally enslaved by his passion. And indeed, since the passion subjugates reason, it makes reason its servant or its slave, it can even employ reason to justify itself, right? So if you criticize the passionate person, he will probably come up with some sort of sophistry, some sort of wrong but seemingly rational arguments to explain why his passion is perfectly fine and rational, right? Like someone who's infatuated, if you try to reason with him that maybe this person he has such a strong crush on is not totally perfect, and maybe his whole life should not revolve around that person and getting together with that person, maybe he will come up with arguments why no, this person is indeed perfect and the perfect partner for him. Or maybe someone who passionately wants to take revenge, if you try to talk him out of it, he will give you reasons why that other person is very much evil and totally deserves being murdered or whatever. So why he is right in seeking revenge. So it is hard to make these people even see that there's a problem, and to make them even want to get rid of their passion. So again, maybe it would be possible to get rid of it if you wanted to, but the people who have a passion usually don't want to get rid of it as long as they have it. While on the other hand, with the affections, Kant says, no one would usually want them, right? Like if you're a person who has affections and you are not very self-reflective, then maybe you will not see that it is a problem. Maybe you first have to be shown this, but no one who does not have a certain affection would wish for it, right? Like if you're a person without anger issues, you would normally not say, oh, I wish I would get angry and aggressive more easily. Or if you're a person who is not super sensitive and always getting sad to the point of crying, you would usually not say, oh, I wish I would start crying more easily or whatever. So with the affections, it's more easy to see them as a problem that you should work on, even though, of course, not in the very moment when you have that affection. But with the passion, people usually don't see it as a problem, and the passion even abuses their reason to justify itself. So to sum up what I said so far, you can see that affections and passions have something in common. Both are immoral, both are against the duties towards yourself because they are undignified, because they make you stop being a rational being who leads himself through his reason. But both at the same time are also not prudent. Both just cause harm to you and make you more unhappy. What they also have in common is that both make you unable to consider the whole, right? It's either a feeling or a desire that is so strong that you cannot consider anymore the sum of all your feelings, of all your desires, which means that both of them are unaufklärt because you're not leading yourself, and both of them are a form of delusion. When I get to Kant's concept of Aufklärung, I will talk more about how to him Aufklärung is getting rid of delusions, and delusion to him means essentially taking something as too important, which isn't, right? Treating a mere means to a purpose as a purpose in itself. And therefore, the affections or the passions, like, for example, the rich person getting angry over the one broken cup, or the infatuated person treating the one he has a crush on as the only thing in life that matters, that is delusional. That is treating something as the highest purpose, or as having the highest significance, which should not be treated as such. For that reason, also, affections and passions have in common that they are both irrational. Because, again, reason precisely means that you can consider the whole, and that you can deduce the specific from the whole, which both the passions and the affections keep you from doing that. Both to Kant are also an issue of abstraction. However, you could look at this from both sides. You could say the person is abstracting too much. That is, the person with an affection is abstracting from all his other feelings, only focusing on this one feeling. The person with a passion is abstracting from all his other desires, only focusing on this one desire. But you could also, of course, frame it the other way around and say that people here abstract too little. They don't abstract from this one particular feeling or desire to consider the whole. And also, what both also have in common is that Kant says the most noble ones, meaning the most noble affections or the most noble passions, are in fact the most dangerous ones. So Kant would say, if you are in the affection of compassion, like you very strongly feel somebody else's pain, that is certainly more noble than being very angry and aggressive and attacking with someone, but it can actually be more harmful. Like, for example, you can easily be manipulated, or you can easily throw all your money at a single beggar, even though elsewhere it would be needed more. Or likewise with the passions, Kant would say being infatuated is certainly more noble than being passionately addicted to gambling, for example, or than the passionate hatred and lust for revenge. But again, he considers it actually more dangerous and harmful. But also, both, despite having so much in common, both are, of course, different. Because, again, both belong to different faculties of our psyche. The affections belong to the faculty of feeling pleasure and displeasure. The passions belong to the faculty of desiring. which is also the reason why the affections are like a short storm and the passions are permanent, like a steady stream, and which is also the reason why the affections take reason completely away for a moment, but very obviously so, while the passions enslave it and subject it to themselves, and therefore can actually abuse reason to justify themselves, to make it seem like not just the way someone goes about reaching his aim is rational, but making it seem, at least to himself, maybe also to others, as if even that aim as such were rational. And for that reason, so both being, despite having so much in common, being different, belonging to different faculties of the psyche, Kant would say that they don't necessarily go along always. So the very same person is not always someone who both has strong affections and strong passions. There can be people who have very strong affections but are not passionate at all, and it can also be the other way around. And this is true for individuals, but also for whole nations, because Kant often talks about the character of nations or of races, which of course today would not be considered scientific nor politically correct anymore. But back then in the 18th century, it was something that not just Kant did, it was considered very normal. And here he says, for example, that the English and the Italian people, they both have affections and passions. So between those two, the Italians have the stronger affections. But then when you consider the French and the Indians, Kant says the French have very strong affections, but they have no passions. So a French noble in the courts and the salons, sure, he may, when he sees a lady that is pretty, he may be very smitten with her and may be very into her for a brief time. But he will also forget about her equally fast. He will not be passionately infatuated. Or likewise, he may easily get angry, easily get insulted, easily demand a duel from someone. But then just as quickly he could become that person's best friend again and forget all about the insult. He will not cultivate a passionate lust for revenge. While on the other hand, Kant says the Indians, they seem very phlegmatic. They seem to not have any affections at all. They seem always calm. But inwardly, they can have very strong burning passions like love as a passion, so infatuation, or like hatred as a passion, so wanting revenge or whatever. That they can keep and cultivate and work on for years. Now, about the passions, there's more to say. I already did say that a passion to Kant is a very strong desire that makes me forget all my other desires. But he also believes that not every desire can turn into a passion. For example, the desire to eat is certainly a desire we have. It can even be a strong desire. But there can be no passion for food. Of course, as a manner of speaking, nowadays we might say I'm passionate about food. But a real passion in Kant's sense that makes you forget all your other desires towards food is not possible. Rather, he believes that all passions are about people, about our fellow human beings, right? Like the examples I used so far, mainly being infatuated or wanting revenge on someone, that's about people. why is that so? Well, the explanation to Kant is this. Our desires, if they don't have to do with people, then their fulfillment depends on nature, right? I want to eat, I find my food in nature. But nature follows laws, and these laws have universality. It's always the same laws, right? So if I understand the laws of nature, then I can use them to my advantage, and I can force nature, so to say, to help me to do what I want, right? Like if I have some sort of sickness and I know that this specific plant in nature heals that sickness, then all I need to do is eat that plant and I will be healthy again, right? Or if I want to make a fire and I know, for example, that wet things don't burn well, but dry things do, then I can collect dry leaves and dry twigs to make a fire with. So, fulfilling your desires, if they do not depend on other people, is really just a matter of are you too lazy to do it? Or do you lack the skill? Do you lack the knowledge of the laws of nature? But if you are not lazy nor lacking in knowledge or skill, then you can really fulfill more or less any desire that you have, if it depends on your nature. So in that sense, you don't need to fear not being able to fulfill your desires. That is, unless your desire is a wish. I talked about this in the lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will, that Kant does not use the word wish like we do nowadays, meaning anything you would like to happen, but rather to him, a wish is a delusional desire, an empty desire, an irrational desire for something that is not within your power, right? So if now I get hungry, my desire for food, Kant would not call that a wish, because I can go to the fridge and I can get myself food, I can cook for myself. A wish to him would be something like wanting to fly, wanting to be immortal, wanting to bring back a dead person. Those are the only sorts of desires that depend on nature, that cannot be easily fulfilled. But as long as you have no wishes, and as long as you have enough knowledge, enough skill, generally you can fulfill your desires. But, Kant says, when it comes to our fellow human beings, they have free will. And therefore, there are no general laws that govern their behavior. Of course, there are some rules, maybe, like we can get knowledge of our fellow human beings, what they like, what they respond to, but it never has the same certainty as the laws of nature, right? Like I know that something dry will burn easily. I don't know that another person can be balked with enough money. Maybe I can assume that, maybe it will be true in many cases, but I cannot be absolutely certain always. And so, since our fellow human beings are free, when the fulfillment of one of our desires depends on them, that means we are now dependent on their whims, on their free choices, right? And indeed, Kant would say, with the development of culture, of civilization, this becomes more and more the case. Which is also why Kant would believe that savages are pretty much free of passions. They are not very passionate. So, because they are not yet very dependent on other human beings, right? If you're a savage and you are hungry, you can just go hunt, or you can just go pluck fruits from a tree. But if you are a civilized person and you are hungry, then maybe the forest where you would like to hunt in is owned by the local lord, or maybe the tree that has fruits growing on it is fenced in and is standing in the garden of your neighbor. And so you can now only get your food if other people give it to you. Maybe you can somehow convince them to give you what you want because they like you or because you give them money. But you need in some way to get your desires fulfilled from others. And the more and more culture and civilization develops, the more we are dependent on others. I mean, anyone can reflect on the things he would like to have, or maybe also the reasons why he is unhappy, the things he thinks he's lacking in life. And I think you would find that more or less all of it, in one way or another, depends on other people. Either you are not popular enough, or not attractive enough, or you don't have enough money or enough power. But it's always about other people not wanting to give you what you want from them and what you cannot take for yourself without their consent. And so, for that reason, this is where we can get passionate. We get passionate about wanting something from other people. And hence Kant would say that if you are stranded on a lone island, maybe you can still have affections, right? Like you could get scared or panic when there's a wild animal, or you could get the affection of desperation when you do realize that you are stranded there and there's no way to get away. Affections would still be possible on the lone island, but you would probably not have any passions there. Because again, whatever you need, like your food or your shelter, your fire, you can always have it as long as you are just skillful enough and can extract it from nature, so to say. So, yeah, for that reason, the passions are about other people. I mean, maybe there's something that is kind of similar to a passion, in that it is also a desire that very much occupies you, and that would be the addiction. And maybe an addiction would be possible even on a lone island or even for a savage. So probably they would be less prone to addictions also than the civilized person. But I would say that the addiction to a substance is probably more of a physiological thing, with something happening in your brain, while the passion, as Kant describes it, is more of a psychological thing. But addictions, that's not something that Kant really discusses. But the passions, again, they are always about other people. Now, Kant would say that not always is this quite so obvious. Like, sure, when you are infatuated or when you want revenge, it's clear that this is about another person. To Kant, there's, for example, also passionate greed, where it seems that the object of the passion is not people, but money. But indirectly, it is people, Kant would say, because why do you want money? Not for its own sake, but rather because you think you can buy something with it, right? Ask the greedy person if you get stranded on a lone island, would you rather have a treasure full of gold coins, or would you rather have lots of food and warm clothing or whatever, right? And then you can see that the greed is not about the money as such, but about being able to buy money with it, right? So you can say that when your desires depend on other people, they might depend on them directly. Like, for example, when you desire sex, you need the consent of the person you're attracted to. Um, or they might depend on them indirectly, like you want food, but it is owned by another person, so maybe you need to buy it from that person, or you need to be gifted the food. And here desires come into here desires can turn into passion. So surely if you look around now, you can find people being passionate, being sort of addicted to things, not directly to other persons. Like, for example, consider all these people that are addicted to somehow transforming their body, right? People addicted to going to the gym and getting oh so muscular, or these people that are looks maxing, or people addicted to plastic surgery, or this whole beauty delusion, people being addicted to makeup and fashion and so on. Sure, that seems to not be directly about other people, and many of those people, if you ask them, would say, no, I'm doing this for myself because I want to feel good about my body, about my looks. I'm not doing it to attract people or whatever. And in a sense, they might be truthful. They are not doing it to be pleasing to a specific person, maybe. But still, just ask yourself, would all these people be doing that? Would they be working on their bodies so much if there was no social media, if there was no Instagram to post their body, if they were on a lone island? Probably not. So the passion, at least indirectly, is always about other people. Kant also further categorizes and systemizes the passions. So it's important to know that it says that a passion is not caused by its object. So it's not that I see money, for example, and then I get greedy. But rather, he says it's the other way around. So the passion comes first, and since I have a certain passion, or at least a propensity to a certain passion, I will then seek for myself an object befitting my passion. So it's about what sort of, you could say, character you have that makes you get passionate about certain things. Which very much fits with my own aufklärt philosophy in that people are not victims, they are perpetrators. So Kant would say a person that is more close and narrow-minded is more prone to becoming greedy, because those people, they just want to have and have and have, even though they lack the you could say the fantasy to even think about what they would do with all the money, but they just want to have it to maybe be more secure, to maybe have the ability to get whatever they want, even though they cannot come up with anything specific that they would want. On the other hand, if you are passionate about honor, about your reputation, about becoming famous and well-liked, Kant would say that is something that will probably develop more in a person who has a choleric, rash character that is more prone to anger, because someone like that is more prone to doing rash, heroic actions that might earn him honor. So you first have your character, so to say, and then you might have a propensity to a passion that befits that character. But what kind of passions are there, according to Kant? Well, he makes two distinctions. On the one hand, Kant says, or rather, first, let's note that all the passions are desires, right? Very strong desires or inclinations, and therefore, when we want to categorize the passions, we simply need to categorize the desires or the inclinations. And here Kant says, first, you can say that there is innate inclinations that we are born with. And those are inclinations of nature, like desiring food or desiring sex. And second, there are acquired inclinations that we don't have by nature, but rather we get them throughout our lives, maybe. And those he calls inclinations of culture. Like consider all the people that nowadays are addicted to their smartphone and would probably suffer if you take the smartphone or if you took social media away for just even a week. Clearly, all our ancestors spent their whole lives without smartphones and without social media. So clearly, that's not a natural desire. And these natural desires tend to be more, if they turn into passions, more hot passions, Kant would say, while the ones of culture tend to turn into more cold passions. If you ask why this distinction, Kant himself does not really answer that, but to him it's always very important to be architectonic. I gave a lecture earlier on about his architectonic method, which to him is what makes science, what distinguishes science from common non-scientific cognition. And to him, that means that you don't just go around empirically looking whatever you might find when, for example, you want to categorize, because there's always the danger of, for example, overlooking something. But rather, you should start from a principle of reason, an architectonic principle that gives you the structure a priori. So before any experience. And now, when you do go and make experience, you already, so to say, have your categories ready that you just need to fill in. And so you know what you're looking for. Well, here I would say, if you apply the architectonic method, Kant, like he often does, without necessarily spelling it out, goes by human nature as he understands it. I will explain that further when I get to his anthropology, but he says that humans have a threefold nature. One, we are sensual beings, we are an animal species. And I think this is where you get the natural inclinations, the innate inclinations. And two, we are still sensual beings, but sensual beings with an intellect, sensual beings that can think, that are also social beings. And this is, I think, where you get the inclinations of culture, the acquired inclinations. And then third, we are spiritual, we are rational beings. But it makes sense that this third category does not have a corresponding class of passions, because considered purely as intellectual, as rational beings, we do not have inclinations and we do not have passions. So it makes sense that they don't appear here in this categorization. So these are the two categories we have. We have the innate and we have the acquired passions. But then at the same time, Kant also says that all the inclinations and therefore also all the passions that they could turn into can either be material ones or formal ones. The material ones are about a specific object that we are desiring, right? Like, for example, when you, once again, when you desire food or when you desire sex. And that's why Kant also calls them inclinations or then passions of indulgence, because you're seeking a direct pleasure. The other ones, the formal ones, are not about an object and a pleasure as such, but rather about acquiring the means to get pleasures, right? Like, for example, the desire for money and the respective passion of greed, unlike food or unlike sex, money is not something you can indulge in directly. I mean, unless maybe you're Scrooge McDuck diving into your big pile of gold coins. But rather, it does not give you a direct pleasure, but it is a means of acquiring pleasures, like maybe food or sex. So if you win the lottery, you are happy not because your body suddenly feels differently, right? It's not that you're suddenly having a good taste in your mouth or an orgasm. You feel like you did the minute before you heard about winning the lottery. But you're happy because you imagine that now you can get all sorts of pleasures. So therefore, these formal pleasures are not pleasures of indulgence like the material ones, but they are pleasures of delusion, Kant says. They are imagined pleasures, because here we desire the means of getting pleasures. And so therefore we end up with four kinds of inclinations and therefore also four kinds of possible passions, right? Innate material ones and acquired material ones, and also innate formal ones and acquired formal ones. Let's first start with the material ones. As I said, all the material desires or inclinations and then also the corresponding passions are about desiring a specific object because it brings pleasure and wanting to indulge in that object. And here Kant is a bit unclear or contradicts himself in different places when it comes to further categorizing them, because he does like to say that all material inclinations we have are about welfare or living well, about leisureliness, and about busyness. Leisureliness would be the desire to do nothing. So being lazy, resting, laying around. And this can, of course, be a desire. This can bring a certain pleasure. But also we have the opposite desire, the one of busyness. That would be a desire for activity, for doing something, which again can be split up into the desire for work. So for doing something productive, doing something useful, that produces something. But the inclination for busyness can also manifest in the desire for play, which to Kant is a sort of busyness, a sort of activity that does not work towards a goal outside of itself, wanting to reach some goal, wanting to produce something, but rather that is done for its own sake, right? And here play is meant in the broadest possible sense. So Kant means stuff like playing games, playing sports, hunting, dancing, doing music, doing hobbies, gambling, whatever. All of that is play and could be part of this desire for busyness, just like work could be part of this desire for busyness. The issue, however, is that when Kant talks about these material inclinations in mostly his anthropological lectures and his anthropological notes, it's a bit unclear because, for one, sometimes it seems that he is dividing them into these three categories, right? We can desire living well, we can desire leisure, doing nothing, or we can desire activity. But then at other times, it seems that he's saying that all material desires are about living well, and that living well can happen through leisure, through doing nothing, or through busyness, through being active, right? So it's not always clear if it's a split into three or a split into two. Also, it's not always clear where physical pleasure, like food, drink, sex, belongs. It seems, if you read some passages, that this would belong to the desire of living well. But then it can also seem in some passages of Kant that he considers this part of the desire of leisure, right? Of being passive, doing nothing, and basically having things affect you in a pleasurable manner. Also, the third problem is the issue of play, because while Kant does in certain passages consider play alongside work as part of the general desire for activity, there also seem to be other passages where play seems to be considered part of well living, which would reduce activity to just the desire to work. And then lastly, there's also the issue that Kant at several points talks about love as a material inclination that we have. And love then is split up again by him into a love for self and sexual love. So love for the other person. And this would certainly be a material desire. You desire a certain object, your own life or the other person. But where does it belong? Again, it seems at some points, if you consider the split living well, leisure, and busyness, that Kant puts it under living well. But then there seem to be other instances where he does not seem to think within the framework of this threefold split of well living, leisure, and busyness at all, and where it seems that this saying material inclinations can be about love for self, love for the other, does not have to do anything with this aforementioned threefold split. So all of this is a bit unclear, and it seems that Kant not fully categorize this further. But what we can say in general is that all the material inclinations, as long as they have to do with other people, can turn into passions, can take over and can make us forget our other desires that we might have. And here Kant says the if the passion comes not from an acquired, that is from a cultural inclination, like for example the one for certain kinds of play, right? Like for hunting or playing music or gambling or whatever. These are not natural. These can only develop in a certain culture that even knows of these activities, right? But rather, if the passion is based on the innate, on the natural inclinations, then the passion is stronger, but also more base, more despicable, because you are acting even less as a human being, right? And therefore, the strongest, but also the material passion we should despise the most is precisely the one for love. No matter which kind of love, right? So you can passionately love yourself and your own life. That is your natural desire to stay alive, can become so strong that you would sacrifice anything for it, that you would betray your own friends and sacrifice them, that you would sacrifice your morality and do something evil to stay alive, that you would even sacrifice your own happiness, that you would rather live on as a slave, live a miserable life, rather than have no life at all and at least die with dignity. This is very undignified. But likewise, the sexual love, the love for the other, again, the strong infatuation that is not love, but very passionate infatuation. Those two, Kant says we should despise the most, but they are also the two most strong. And that is because here we most lower ourselves beneath our humanity, right? If you're very passionate about something that is part of culture, like for example about your work or about playing some game, while it's still a passion, so you're still a slave to your desire, at least there's some humanity in it. But wanting to survive or wanting to fuck is something that even the animals want. So if that gets to the point of a passion, you sort of throw your humanity away completely and behave in a very animalistic manner, which is very undignified. But let's turn from the material inclinations and therefore the material passions to the formal ones, about which Kant has to say quite a lot more. And again, in general, these formal ones, they are always about not directly wanting to get an object of our desire, but rather desiring the general means to get various objects that we might or might not desire. And I want to start with the innate or the natural formal inclinations. Or rather inclination, because there's only one, a negative one, that is freedom. Because, again, all the formal inclinations are about the means to get what we want, but the positive means to get what we want, like for example money, or power or reputation, are means that don't exist in nature, but only in a society, and therefore also the inclinations for that cannot be natural, right? Like the savage does not desire reputation or power or money, because in his savage life, these things cannot get him anything that he wants. But what we do desire by nature is freedom. And freedom, of course, is not a positive means to get what we want. Just because we are free does not mean automatically that we can satisfy our desires. Like I might be free and I could still starve, or I might be free and still be sexually unfulfilled. But it serves as a negative means to get whatever we desire. Because freedom, understood as independence, means, of course, that at least we are not blocked from trying to get what we want, right? And so, therefore, this is the one innate formal inclination we have, the one not material but formal inclination that we are born with. And this indeed Kant considers something that all human beings are born with, and that is very strong in us, even in the human being of nature, so to say, the uncivilized person. Indeed, he says that it comes even before our consciousness, even before having a clear eye, a clear sense of self. He believes that it can be observed even in the newborn baby. And to him, what shows this is the fact that human babies cry, while animal babies do not. Because Kant very strongly believes that normally everything in nature is purposive. But freedom, of course, is not part of nature, right? Freedom precisely means being independent of nature and the natural laws. But everything in nature is purposive. That is a very strong belief of his. One that I will discuss when I get to his philosophy of nature, when I will give a lecture on teleology, which is the doctrine of the purposes. But he would say that if something appears in nature, at least regularly, then it is purposive, right? Like, for example, when you see an animal species that has wings, those wings will not just be there to flop around and serve no purpose at all, but rather normally you can assume that this species can fly with the wings. Again, if it's regular in nature, sure, there might be cases like disabilities in a specific individual, but those are not part of the species. But if something is regular in nature, then it has a purpose, Kant believes. Nowadays, of course, he did not have our theory of evolution that was started by Darwin, but nowadays you could equally say that our biologists would usually assume if something appears regularly in a species, then yes, it must be purposive in the sense that it must give some survival advantage and not disadvantage, or otherwise the species would have died out or would have developed to get rid of that feature. So, but if we look at a baby crying, that is actually not purposive in nature, Kant would say. Because, I mean, babies cry right when they are born. It's the first thing they do usually, right? And consider this situation. The baby itself is completely helpless, completely defenseless. But also the mother that just gave birth is probably very exhausted, very weak in it, so she's also pretty defenseless. So this is the worst possible situation to cry, because this might attract predators. This might attract dangers. We are not used to think about this fact because, of course, we are so used to live in a society where usually the crying of the newborn baby is not a problem, where usually there are no dangerous predators that might be attracted. But if we are thinking of the very first human beings, the crying of the baby, it seems, would have been bad for survival. And that's why, indeed, amongst animals, you will find that often the babies, they are silent, right? Like a cat may hide her litter somewhere, her little kittens, and they will mostly stay silent. Or a mouse, the little newborn mice are, of course, also helpless, being naked and blind. But they are hidden away and they are staying silent. If the animal babies make sounds, it's usually just in specific situations, right? Like, sure, the young birds, they might get very loud in their nest when their parents come to feed them with a worm, because every young bird in the nest wants the worm for himself, right? And wants to get attention. But then when the parents fly away again to look for the next worm, then the young birds in their nest will usually turn silent so as not to attract predators. So Kant says it's kind of strange, considered from that perspective, that human babies are crying. And he thinks that it's not really explainable out of nature and the purposes that nature might have, or nowadays we could say out of evolution and only the fittest surviving. And therefore, to Kant, this is an indicator of the innate desire for freedom, for independence in all human beings. Because, of course, the baby finds itself very unfree, very dependent. It can do basically nothing. And whenever it does have a concrete desire, like when it's cold, or when it wants its diapers changed because it pooped them, or when it's hungry, it finds itself unable to fulfill that desire. It depends on others for that. And so Kant says the baby has some unconscious sense of this being an injustice, of this being not as things should be, of this being some sort of outrage, the fact that it has no freedom, no independence. And so through its crying, it sort of protests against finding itself so unfree and so dependent. And through that protest, of course, it gains the attention of the grown-ups, who will then hopefully help. Which is also why the more independent, that is, the more free we get, the less prone to crying we are, right? I mean, as a grown-up, maybe you might still cry, I don't know, if you lose a loved one, because again, you feel now unfree, you feel powerless. But you will not cry probably at every small thing. Like when you are hungry, you don't cry, you go to the fridge and get yourself food, because you now are free enough to do that. So, and even in children, right, you can see that the toddler is already crying a bit less than the baby, but still cries very easily when he falls down or whatever. And the older the child gets, the less it will cry probably, because more and more it finds itself free, independent, and therefore it less and less has to sort of protest against not being free. And again, this inclination for freedom in human beings is very strong. So Kant likes to point out that there are many stories of savages. He thinks of, for example, Native Americans in North America, or people in Africa, or whatever, that lived amongst the Europeans for a while. Maybe they were abducted to be paraded around Europe, but then were permitted to go home again. or maybe they served in a European army in some colonial war for a time. And he says that it has been found that whenever they are allowed to go, almost always they will go back to their savage life. They will leave the culture, the civilized life again. And this cannot be explained through material desires, because materially the life of the cultured person, the life in society, is generally better, right? In their savage life, they might go hungry for several days till they manage to hunt something, or they might go cold in cold nights or whatever. The life in society is much more comfortable. So therefore, if they go back to the savage life, it's probably not out of a material inclination, but of this formal inclination for freedom and independence. Because having grown up with so much freedom, to them, our society feels like living in a cage, even if it's a golden cage that offers lots of comforts. And they would rather give up all these comforts to get their independence back, which goes to show what Kant is saying, that the formal inclination for freedom is indeed much stronger than all the material inclinations, even the ones that are most strong, even the ones for love. And this inclination that we all have by nature, and that is already very strong, can now turn into a passion when other people come into play. Because, of course, nature can also take away our freedom, our independence. Like if we get sick or whatever, if we hurt ourselves. But for the most part, if we are in nature on our own, like on a lone island, we are free in the negative sense. We are independent. It is mostly other people with their own freedom that threaten our freedom. And therefore, it is mostly in society that we must be afraid of losing our freedom. And here, this natural inclination for freedom, which is justified to a degree, can turn into a strong and irrational passion, where we passionately fight against any perceived threat to our independence. And this is the basis for what Kant calls the barbaric freedom. It's something I discussed in previous lectures on what is justice, and on what is the state, why do we need a state. I said that, and also in my lecture on what is freedom, there I said that Kant distinguishes between wild or savage freedom that is completely unrestricted, and freedom under the law. And only the latter is rational, because the wild or savage freedom, lacking restrictions, will destroy itself, right? So, for example, when there are no laws, okay, I'm now free to kill others if I feel like it, to maybe take revenge if someone angered me or whatever. But they are also free to kill me, and being killed would kind of take my freedom away. So it would be more rational to enter a civil state of laws where I lose some freedom, the freedom, for example, to murder others, but therefore my freedom is also protected because they are forbidden from murdering me. So that's the distinction between the wild, savage, and the freedom under the law. And now the barbarian to Kant is the savage who insists on staying a savage, right? So if you just don't know the civilized, the lawful freedom, that's one thing. But when you get to know it, when it's offered to you, and you actively reject it, you insist on irrationally keeping this unrestricted freedom, even though it will inevitably destroy itself, then that makes you a barbarian. And now, again, this barbaric freedom I discussed previously already, but here now we have its reason. Its reason is this passion for freedom. People would rather reject laws, would rather reject restrictions, even if they are rational ones, even if they are ones meant to ultimately protect their freedom, rather than lose some sort of independence. That is precisely, as I discussed in my lectures on Kant's philosophy of right, that is the issue on the level of individuals that are always distrustful of the state and of laws and always fighting against the state. And this is also the issue on the level of states and nations that are very much, and we see that nowadays, rejecting submitting to international law, submitting to a rule of law between and above the states, and rather insist on keeping their own sovereignty, even if it means living in a lawless jungle where only the strong rule, which, of course, at the end of the day, is to no one's advantage, because no one can be sure to always remain the strong. But still, even though it would be much more rational for all the states to come together in one proper federation of nations under one proper international law that is actually enforced upon everyone, that would actually create lasting perpetual peace. Out of this passion for freedom, we reject it. And that is why, as I previously said, Kant says the history of right, of justice, takes centuries or even millennia, right? It is every small step in making the world more just, in establishing laws, in ending the lawless anarchy, ending the wild jungle that people or nations live in, and bringing them under rational laws that actually protect their true freedom. Every single step, people fight against tooth and nails, and it can take decades or centuries to just go one step ahead, right? For example, you see it in the US, right, where people so passionately will defend their right to own guns, even though it means that their children are regularly killed in school shootings, and it would be more rational to restrict that freedom a bit in order to make sure that people keep their freedom by staying alive, right? Or here in Germany, where we are one of the last countries on earth with no speed limit at all on the highways. And also here, people passionately fight against that speed limit. And in past decades, like nowadays, when you drive with a car, it's mandatory to wear your seatbelt, which again is only rational, right? It prevents death in case of an accident. But this law too, now that it's there, people accept it. People are used to it. No one calls for it being abolished again. But when it was first introduced, it was a big fight, and there were many people and politicians, parties that resisted it for a long time, right? Likewise, nowadays in Germany, in normal bars and normal restaurants, smoking is forbidden inside. Again, helps everyone, right? Like the smokers can go outside if they absolutely need to smoke, but the other customers, and also even more so the waiters that have to be there all day, they are now not smoking passively. It's a massive win for everyone, but still, it is something that was hard fought for. Um, so there is simply no measure, no law, that would restrict freedom in some way, no matter how rational it is, no matter how much it would benefit people, that you could just pass without controversy. Like, there could literally be something in all our foods that causes turbo cancer, that would be proven to cause turbo cancer, and still you would have people and politicians fighting against banning it. Absolutely, certainly. So it's always this fight, and that is always because of this irrational passion for freedom. We civilized, cultivated people, we are still half barbarians. Nowadays, most people are liberals. I talked in my lecture, What is Freedom, to Kant, about what I call the liberal concept of freedom, which is I'm just being left alone and I can do whatever I want. I refuse any self reflection about what I want, about whether I really should want it, or about why do I even want it? Is it really me who wants it, or is it just nature in me, my animalistic desires, or is it just society in me, that which I was socialized into wanting? No, I just want to do what I want. And I said there that most people nowadays are liberals. Be it left wingers, be it right wingers, they might focus on different things, right? Like the right winger might say, oh, let me drive my car, let me shoot my gun, let me eat my meat, let me have free speech, meaning let me throw out my unqualified opinion and my hatred into the world. And the left winger might say, oh, let me have my chosen pronouns, let me have my abortion, let me have sex with whomever I want and however I want, let me dress however I want. But they both are liberal in the sense that they passionately and irrationally insist on this freedom to do whatever they want, and think that their freedom is being taken away if what they want is ever even so much as questioned, and they are ever asked to justify wanting this. They are ever asked, is it really rational to want this? Right? And so you can suggest nothing, no matter how small and trivial and how rational it would be, that would take some sort of freedom away, without surely many people rebelling against it, right? Like already 200 years ago, Fichte suggested, for example, forbidding being drunk in public. I mean, nowadays, drunk driving is forbidden, right? You would say drunk walking should also be forbidden. I mean, if you are drunk in public, you are just being loud and annoying and throwing up on the street and maybe being aggressive and attacking people. Why should this be allowed? You can be drunk at home in your own room if you want, but why should it be allowed in public? I mean, it would be totally rational to forbid it, but you can be sure, even with something this trivial and not as important as, let's say, forbidding things that destroy our climate or whatever, still you would have people screaming against that. Like here in Germany, people constantly talk about Verbotspolitik, politics of prohibition, and it's sort of a dirty word, right? If a politician or a party is accused of engaging in that, that's very bad for their publicity, and everyone, no matter where on the political spectrum, tries to show that they are not for politics of prohibition, when in fact the question should not be, are they trying to prohibit something, because that should not be bad in itself, right? I think it's good that murder is forbidden, or that stealing is forbidden, or whatever. The question should always be this concrete proposal of theirs, this concrete action. Is it good to forbid that or not? And this is precisely where you can see that here this natural inclination for freedom has turned into a passion. As usual, a passion means a delusion in the sense of Kant. I already said delusion means a means is treated as a purpose in itself. Something is treated as if it was of the utmost importance, when in truth it is maybe only of relative importance, right? Freedom does have importance as a means to other ends, sure, but the importance is not in freedom, that is independence as such and at any cost. And like all the passions, you are here being foolish, not in the sense of being a nar, but in the sense of being a tor. So you might actually reach your goal. In this case, you might, let's say in politics, when you fight against certain laws, against certain restrictions, against certain prohibitions, you might succeed in that. You might succeed in upholding lawlessness. Like, for example, you might succeed in destroying international law, or in not having restrictions that would protect the climate. But it is foolish because that should not be your highest aim, and that will actually harm you and eventually take your freedom from you. So here we can very clearly see that these people that get passionate about their freedom, it really is an irrational desire just for means. That's why it's amongst the formal inclinations and the formal passions, because they don't even know what they want their freedom for. It's not about having a specific desire, right? Like, sure, when I love a specific woman and then I'm forbidden from marrying her because we are of different social status or whatever, or because it would be an interracial marriage and that is forbidden. Here I know why I want to be free. But these people, when they are passionate about freedom in general, then it's not about wanting something specific. It is about wanting freedom as a negative means for any desire that might come up. It's just that they fear whenever any sort of restriction of their freedom is proposed, even if they would not feel that specific restriction in their lives, they fear that they are losing their freedom, right? Like, for example, if it was suddenly forbidden that to travel to China, I've never traveled to China in my life, and I don't plan to do it. So effectively, nothing in my life would change. But still, it might be an issue, because if they are forbidding that, what might they forbid next, right? So people are sensitive about their freedom being threatened, because even if their concrete material desires are not endangered right now, some desire might come up where they might need their freedom. And so they want to keep their freedom, they want to keep their independence. And just to add to that, Kant also says that the desire or even the passion for revenge is somewhat connected with that. Because the rational way to gain freedom or to retain freedom would be through justice, right? Because, as I explained in my lectures on Kant's philosophy of right, the right to him is about the mine and yours, so about property. And justice means everyone's property is secure, be it the acquired property like my house, or be it the innate property like my body and my natural freedom. Justice, to Kant, the motto of private justice in the state of nature when there's no laws is neminem lede, so harm nobody. That is, don't take for yours what belongs to somebody else. And the motto of justice as public justice, justice based on laws, on institutions, would be suum quique tribur, give to each his own. That is, give to each a guarantee that what is his will stay his and will not be harmed. And if we had that, if justice was established, then we would have perpetual peace. And then, of course, my freedom would be secure, right? If that which is mine is guaranteed as mine, if nobody else can take it, then my freedom is secure. What threatens my freedom amongst other people is injustice, right? If someone enslaves me, if someone steals my property, it always comes down to some sort of injustice that takes freedom away. So therefore, if you want freedom, and if it's not this irrational passion that just makes you want any sort of independence at any cost, that makes you a barbarian, that irrationally rebels against even the most rational laws that would actually protect freedom, if you want freedom, rationally, you should want justice. Well, Kant says, where does the desire for revenge come from? Always an injustice was done to you, whether an actual one or at least a perceived one, but at least you feel that an injustice was done to you. And that means that in some way your freedom was infringed upon. And if you would just accept this, if you would just let this happen, then you would lose freedom. So Kant says the reason why human beings desire revenge is ultimately because they desire freedom, because they feel like someone has taken their freedom or has threatened their freedom in some way, and only by taking revenge can they remove this obstacle to their freedom, can they be free again. This would also be an explanation why animals generally don't take revenge, right? They might be angry and fight back if you attack them, but then if you run away and never bother them again, they will probably not try to find you and plot their revenge for years and so on, because they don't care about justice, because they don't have this innate inclination towards freedom. So really, the passion for revenge is related to this inclination and also this passion for freedom. It's a perverted desire for justice and thereby for freedom. But with that, let's turn over to the other category of the formal inclinations, which would be positive inclinations, which would be not innate but acquired inclinations of culture, meaning that in society we can start desiring not just the negative means of satisfying our desire, which is independence, but we can start desiring positive means to actually get other people to give us what we want. Kant identifies 3 general means to influence other people and get from them whatever you want. All 3 means, however, require a certain slavish attitude from others, right? So Kant is not one of the cynical people that would say, oh, everyone has his price, you just need to find out how you can buy him. He would say, a truly aufklärt, a truly independent, rational, that is a truly moral person, cannot be balked or influenced. If something is truly against his principles, then he will rather die than betray his principles. But most people can be influenced in three ways. Either through fear, so if they are afraid of you in some way, or through influence, through reputation. So if they like you, if they admire you in some way, or through their self-interest. If you can in some way offer them satisfaction of their own desires. And therefore, there are three means to influence them in these ways. Namely, first, power, right? If you have power, you can influence people through their fear. They will not disobey you because they fear your retaliation. Second, honor, by which Kant means basically your reputation that you might have. If you have a good reputation, if people hold you in high regard, if you're esteemed, then they might do what you want from them. And the third means to influence people is money. Because through money, you can speak to people's self-interest, right? With money, they can buy whatever they want. So by giving them money, you are indirectly giving them what they want. And therefore, Kant says, in society, people can acquire these three formal desires or inclinations for power, for honor, or for money. And all three, in turn, can turn into passions. So there can be a passionate desire to rule when you are power hungry. There can be a passionate desire for honor, for reputation, for being famous, for being admired. So a sort of passionate ambition. And there can be greed, a passionate desire for money. And all three of these passions, Kant also notes, they are, of course, passions, and that means it is a desire that got out of hand, and that is irrational because of its strong degree. But these three passions are closer to prudence than other passions, because, these three means of influencing people, power, reputation, money, it is useful to have them in society. And to some degree, you do need to have at least some of them, like maybe at least money, if you want to live in society. So desiring these things is actually prudent and helps your own advantage, your own happiness too. So the problem with the passions here is mostly in the degree of the desire, in desiring them too strongly or too exclusively. Of these three, Kant considers the passion for money, so greed, to be the least noble one, the most despicable one of these three, also the most meaningless one, but at the same time the strongest one. So people want money even more than they want power or to be admired. And this he explains by the fact that of these three means of influencing other people, money is generally the one that works best. So through which you can best get all that you might materially desire. And this in turn, Kant explains because through offering people money, you speak to their self-interest. The problem with the other two is that people might always be inclined to oppose you, right? When you are power hungry and you want to rule over people through their fear, their own lust for power, their own desire to have power, might go against your desire to subjugate them. They don't want to be subjugated. And likewise, if you want to be admired by people, their own desire for admiration might go against your desire, right? You want them to basically kneel at your in front of you and kiss your feet, but they also want you to kiss their feet. So it can't both happen. So therefore, these two passions in one person are always fighting against that same passion in the other people, so to say. But with money, you speak to people's self-interest, right? And when you offer them money, you're not fighting against their greed, but rather you're giving their greed what it wants. So therefore, you can say that the first two they meet with more opposition from people. But the last is the best way to influence people, and therefore, when it turns into passion, wanting money, being greedy, is also the strongest passion. You could also think that this passion, more so than the other two, is one that is not directly connected to people. Here you're desiring not something from people, you are desiring an object, money. But as I already said, no one would want lots of money on a lone island. So yes, the passion directly is directed at an object, at money, but only as a means to influence people. So like all the passions, in the end, it is about people. And of course, like all passions, these three passions are foolish. In the end, Kant would say they are self-defeating, right? Like the one who desires power and tries to control and to enslave everyone else, precisely that might lead to others rebelling against you. If you had wanted less power, if you had let them be more free, if you had been less despotic, less tyrannical, maybe they would have not rebelled. But since you try to control everything, you end up through trying to gain all the power, losing the power maybe. Likewise, if you are too ambitious, too obsessed with your reputation, with your honor, if you are someone who becomes arrogant, wanting everyone else to kiss your feet, precisely because of this arrogance, people will start to dislike you. And since you look down on everyone, in the end, no one will look up to you. And lastly, with the greed, as I already said, if you try to get money and to not lose any money, you will end up living like a poor person, right? Only eating water and bread and so on, to not waste a single cent. And then therefore, okay, you might technically have lots of money, but you live as if you didn't. So what's even the point of having the money? So all three passions, again, not if it's just desires, just inclinations, there's a healthy degree of wanting power or reputation or money, but if they turn into passions, if it gets too much, it's foolish, it's self-defeating. Now, Kant has more to say about this. He makes lots of interesting psychological remarks about all of these. So, for example, he would say that the power-hungry people are really power hungry because of fear, they themselves are afraid to be controlled by others, so they rather want to control everyone else so that no one can enslave them. That's why they want to make everyone else a slave. Or the overly ambitious and arrogant people, Kant says, those who are most arrogant, it turns out, are also always the most ready to grovel at the feet of others. And he explains this because if I expect others to kiss my feet, it's projection. I would not expect others to be willing to do this if I was in a similar situation as they are, wasn't also willing to do this. If I would find that I would be unwilling to do something like that, why would I expect others to be ready to do it? And B, only because I think it's acceptable to do it myself, only because I would not feel it's beneath myself. That is, because I don't care about my own dignity ultimately. Only for that reason do I think that it's fair to also expect it of others to throw away their dignity. So Kant says those people who, let's say, as a boss, are very arrogant towards their subordinates are the same people who, towards their boss, act the opposite way, act in a overly humble way, throw all their dignity away, kissing their feet. And as for greed, Kant says, well, the life of the greedy man is, of course, a very joyless life. Again, he lives like a poor person. But the reason he is willing to do so and maybe doesn't feel like he is lacking so much is because in his mind he is still rich, right? So he might eat only water and bread, but he does think, well, if I wanted to, I could eat the most exquisite food anytime. Or he might walk on foot, but he thinks, well, if I wanted to, I could drive in a carriage. So, and this, of course, he will never do because he does not want to waste money. So, really, this fantasy is quite empty. This saying, if I wanted to, I could do that, because if he was more self-reflected, he would realize, well, but I would never want to do it. I would never want to waste money. But simply because he feels that he could if he just wanted, he in a way already feels as if he is doing these things, and therefore can live with his self-imposed poverty more easily. Also, Kant compares these three and says that youth is most inclined towards the passionate ambition, towards the passion for honor and reputation. Right? I mean, nowadays, consider all the young people obsessed with social media, with their photos on Instagram, with their likes and followers on TikTok or whatever. They very much want to be admired by their peers. Middle-aged people, Kant says, tend to be more power hungry, right? The people, for example, that want to have a career in politics or in a company, or even just that act tyrannical as teachers towards their students or as parents towards their children. They want to control. And he says when people get older, they tend to become more greedy or more stingy. They don't want to spend any money unnecessarily, maybe because they're afraid that otherwise in their old age they will not have enough. So there's lots of psychological remarks Kant makes about these, but I cannot go into all of that. Otherwise, the lecture would get even longer. And I mean, my goal is mostly giving a general overview and an understanding of Kant's thoughts and of the system of Kant's thought, not going into the actual detail of any thought. Here I would rather advise you, if that interests you, to read what Kant has to say about this in his anthropological writings, his anthropology and pragmatic regards, his lectures on anthropology, his notes on anthropology. And indeed, I would advise, if you want to get into Kant, to read those. They're quite interesting. Again, lots of psychological observations of Kant there. And they are much more easy to read than, let's say, his more systematic, philosophical, metaphysical works. Like, there's this reputation Kant has, this cliche that he's so abstract, that his way of writing is so hard, with such long, complicated sentences, with so many complicated Greek or Latin terms. But this is mostly because people look at, like, the critique of pure reason, and they think this is Kant, this is how he usually talks. And in fact, it's not. In fact, this is him trying to be extra precise because it is such an important scientific work. But if you go to his lectures on anthropology, you might have the impression that you're reading a completely different author. It's much, much more easy to read. And therefore, I think it's unfortunate that people wanting to get into Kant often start with his main works and then they are maybe immediately turned off. If you want to get into his thinking and get a general grasp of how Kant sees the human being, or how Kant sees our role and our purpose in life, it's better to start with his much easier anthropological writings, and then you can still get into his more scientific philosophy at a later point. But anyways, with this, I want to close off talking about the passions. And I want to once again consider all of what I said about the affections and the passions together. I want to emphasize once more Kant's belief in the teleology, or in the purposiveness of anything that is natural. Again, I will explain it further in its own lecture eventually, but it is really central to Kant's whole outlook on the world, and specifically on human nature. And so if you don't know this about Kant, then you cannot understand many of the judgments he makes. And so this is especially true also for the affections. While Kant generally considers them to be something irrational, something that is in the way of both prudence and morality, that is undignified and also causing us and possibly people around us lots of unhappiness, he would not say that it is, so to say, a mistake that they exist, that Mother Nature, or if you will, God or evolution or whoever, did something wrong here in giving us these. Rather, Kant says that they can compensate for a lack of reason, because most of the time they make us act, right? If I'm attacked and I get angry, I might fight back. Or if I'm afraid and I go into panic, I might run away. Or if I see someone suffering and I am overcome by compassion, I might help. And so, in a person who is not aufklärt enough to guide himself through reason, it is good that such a person has affections that make him act in some way, rather than being in complete apathy and not really having anything that makes him act at all. And so, in the development of the human being, both in the individual who, of course, as a child is not immediately rational, but also as a species, where we also needed to go through a long process of cultivating and civilizing and moralizing ourselves and becoming more and more aufklärt. So both in the individual and the species, it is good at first that we have the affections to compensate for the lack of reason. But eventually, we should get rid of them, right? They are like training wheels on a children's bike that might be helpful in first learning to drive on the bike. But eventually, you should be able to go without them. They should not become a clutch. And so we should get rid of our affections altogether. I want to emphasize the affections to Kant are feelings after all, but they are especially strong feelings that went out of hand. Kant is not saying that we must stop feeling. Right? I already said that in a previous lecture, that Kant's whole philosophy and his moral philosophy is not about him being an enemy of sensuality, him being for completely cold reasoning, like we should become emotionless robots. Feelings are okay, Kant would say. It's about their degree. No feeling should become so strong, should get so out of hand that it rules over us. So we should tone down our affections to the level where at most they are strong feelings, but not controlling us. If Kant allows for any exceptions, it's the affections that combine themselves with our morality. So the affections that only a moral person could have, right? So I'm not talking about something like compassion, because that to Kant is a natural affection. It is something that even animals can feel. And that is more, once again, a compensation for the lack of actual morality. So here you are not helping someone because you think about it and your reason tells you that this is the right thing to do, but you're simply helping someone because you feel bad for them. So that is an affection that makes you act in a moral manner, but that an immoral person can feel. On the other hand, if you do reflect about your moral duty and about what you should do, it is also possible that this is not just a cold reflection, but that this is accompanied by certain feelings. And these, like all feelings, can become affections. And these are the only affections that Kant is not completely against. He specifically names three. First, there is righteous anger or wrath. Normally, getting angry, getting mad, like other affections, is something bad, right? I already said, if you easily scream at people or attack people, if you have anger issues, then maybe you yourself, if you reflect about this, will realize that this is bad and that you should try to seek therapy or something, that you should get rid of this. But there's one specific instance where getting angry is okay, Kant says, and that is getting angry at injustice, getting angry at evil. And in particular, he says, getting angry at the mistreatment and the exploitation and the oppression of the poor and the weak. Here, some sort of righteous anger is justified. And indeed, this is about the only affection that maybe a person might even wish for, right? I said earlier that no one wishes, oh, I wish I would get angry more easily, or I wish I would get sad and cry more easily, or whatever. Rather, if we don't have an affection, we are generally happy about not having it. But not so with righteous anger. If you are a moral person that very strongly judges and condemns the oppression and exploitation of the poor and the weak. But at the same time, you just happen to also be phlegmatic, so that in a situation where you witness this, you are strongly against it, and maybe you could tell the perpetrator what you're doing is wrong, but you just don't have it in you to say it with a certain fire. You just don't get angry outwardly, no matter how strongly you might condemn it rationally. If you're such a person, you might actually wish in certain situations, I wish I could get into this righteous anger. I wish I could get more loud. I wish I could make this evil person really feel that what he does is wrong. I wish I could tell him off with some fire, right? I myself, being by inclination more phlegmatic, did have that sometimes with my dad, who could get into this righteous anger more easily when, like in the subway, he would tell someone who is misbehaving off and raise his voice. Then I would maybe sometimes wish that I could raise my voice like that. So that would be one thing. Another moral affection is enthusiasm. And enthusiasm, specifically to Kant, means doing what is right, doing the moral thing, with a sort of warm, joyful feeling, or actually burning for the moral action, right? And this enthusiasm, Kant says, is okay. It might even be necessary to sort of give you extra energy to actually do that which you understand is right. Here Kant is influenced by Rousseau, and says, especially the earlier Kant, says that maybe no great things were accomplished in human history without any enthusiasm, right? Maybe it's not enough for people to just understand that something is unjust or oppressive. Maybe for them to actually rebel and start a revolution, to actually fight and risk something, there also needs to be this enthusiastic affection to some degree. And indeed, Kant himself, who I think was not very inclined towards affections overall, who was more phlegmatic, in the late stage of his life, in like his last decade, when the French Revolution happened, according to all accounts by his friends and acquaintances, he was very enthusiastic about it, wanting to talk about nothing else at their dinner parties and so on. And then last, there is boundless, exuberant joy. This, in most cases, Kant says, would be childish and not befitting of a serious, of a rational person. And indeed, this is something I feel very much, because even in younger years, like, I never understood how can you go crazy over, let's say, a football match. Like, okay, it's one thing if you enjoy watching sports, by all means, you can watch it. But getting into it to the point where just because some dude kicked a ball into a goal, you jump up from your seat and you start screaming. That always, even as a child, seemed rather ridiculous to me. And that is indeed something that is childish, that might be excused in children or in teenagers, but at some age you should grow out over getting so joyful, getting so excited over something which, at the end of the day, judged from a rational perspective, does not matter so much. This is, by the way, not the constantly cheerful heart. That is something else. I already mentioned in a previous lecture that, and I will get more into this in the upcoming lectures on happiness, that Kant says the wise person, the happy person, while not always being super excited or super taken up by some pleasure, will always have a constantly cheerful heart in all he does. But that is not what Kant is talking about here. Here he is talking about being very excited, being very overtaken by joy. That is not befitting a serious, a dignified, a rational person, except, Kant says, once again, as an affection that is paired with morality. Because if you are feeling this excitement and joy at the common universal good of all of humankind, that is justified, Kant says. So if I hear that Germany won the World Cup, you will not see me dancing on the street and hugging complete strangers because I'm so happy about it. But if I were to hear that suddenly there's world peace, that suddenly they all somehow agreed on peace treaties and ceasefires, and they all laid down their weapons, and now we have universal peace, that would be the only situation as an aufklärt and moral person where maybe I would dance happy dances and maybe I would cheer out of joy. So these three affections that are paired with morality, these are somewhat okay according to Kant's mind. So even here he is more skeptical. Even here he is saying that maybe it is better because all affections take over to some degree and make us unable to calmly reflect and be rational to some degree. Maybe it's better to be free even of those. But if any affections are acceptable, it's those three. But all in all, we should get rid of the affections. And also, only affections should be paired with morality. The passions, being more dangerous, being more irrational, they are not even okay when they are paired with morality. So once again, enthusiasm about moral matters, about the fight for justice and for freedom, enthusiasm as an affection, that's all right, maybe even necessary to really change things. But Kant says if it becomes not just an affection but a passion, then you are not an enthusiast, you are a fantast or a dreamer. Those would be people that actually have some ideal, like some utopia in their head, and that they actually believe that it can be realized here in this life. The ideal is something that should guide us, that we should strive for, that we should try to always get closer to, but we should realize that we can never fully realize it. So yeah, we should have the ideal of a fully just society. We should accept no injustice. So whenever we find an injustice, we should fight it. And when we resolve that injustice, we should look out if there's another one that we should fight. But that way there can be constant progress, constant improvement, but we will probably never reach a completely just society. This is something, this fight for progress, you could do with enthusiasm. But if you believe that it is possible to make society not just more just, but to make it just, period, in the now and here, if you believe that a complete utopia can be realized, then you are a fantastic dreamer. Then you have a passion for justice, not just enthusiasm, and that would be dangerous. Which leads me from the affections once more to the passions. Here too, Kant believes in the purposiveness of nature. So here too, it is not as simple as just saying, okay, passions are bad. Vasa Kant says even the passions can have positive consequences for society. So he says the ambition for honor, for reputation, can lead someone to actually do good things, right? Maybe he does them for the wrong reasons, so he's not a good person, right? If I help others, if I'm an activist, if I donate lots of money or whatever, just because I want to seem heroic or whatever, okay, I'm not a good person, but still, the result is maybe a good one. Maybe it does help some people. Or when it comes to greed, Kant says that, and this might sound a bit funny, but he says that, okay, the greedy person is hoarding all this money, is being of no use to anyone while he's alive. But maybe when he dies, at least he is of use to his heirs that now get all this money, right? So maybe you have this one aunt that somehow is rich, and maybe she's super stingy and never gives you the smallest present, but when she dies, then you inherit it all. So maybe down the line, it was good for you that she kept all that money. Still, all in all, here too, we should guide ourselves through reason, not let passion sway us. And just like I said about the affections, the problem is not our emotions as such. We can have emotions, they just shouldn't get too strong. The same is true about the passions. Kant is not against these desires that are behind both the material and the formal passions. It is okay to desire living well, or to desire some leisure or some busyness, or to love yourself or the other sex or whatever. And it is also okay to desire independence, or to desire some measure of power, of reputation, or of money. The point is, what is the degree? You should tone it down to a level where it doesn't rule over you, and where you can still be rational about it and think both about your overall happiness, so about your own benefit, and also about your moral duty, about what would be the right thing to do. And the whole reason to Kant why passions even come about, why they get so out of hand, is because of our power of imagination, which is also why animals don't have passions, right? They have desires, they maybe have inclinations, but they cannot get passions according to Kant. As I already said, maybe the animal, when you attack it, gets aggressive, will bite you back, but it will not plot revenge for years. Or maybe the animal is into another animal, wants to mate, but it will not be infatuated to the point where even years after being rejected, it is still thinking of that one other person. It will probably just go and seek another mate. And the reason is their lack of power of imagination. Because with the power of imagination, Kant says, we can increase the actual pleasure that we could have from something, and we can imagine anything as being much more amazing and much more pleasurable than it actually is, right? So when you are, for example, infatuated with someone, you are not looking at the actual person as he is, and not asking how happy would you maybe be, let's say, if you were married to this actual person, but rather you are imagining this person is absolutely perfect, and life with that person as constantly floating on pink clouds, and you're imagining life without that person as completely gray and joyless, and if that person rejects you or breaks up with you, you're not telling yourself, well, there's other fish in the ocean. Amongst 8 billion human beings, maybe there's someone else that I would like somewhere out there, but rather you're telling yourself, again, because of your imagination, that life without this specific person will be completely meaningless, and there will be no chance to ever feel joy again without this person. And this is also the reason that the passions are permanent, that we often don't easily get rid of them, because Kant would say, well, it's not about the actual object, right? The actual object of my passion is not the real object out there in the world, but the imagined object in my mind. The actual object is just used to project my image onto that, right? I'm infatuated not with this real human being, but with my image of this human being. And therefore, I can never really get the object of my desire, because I am not desiring a real existing object. I'm desiring something that doesn't exist, that exists only in my mind. And so there's two possibilities. There's three. I mean, the first one is that I don't succeed anyways, that I don't get what I want. That can happen even if I don't have a passion, but just a normal desire, right? If I desire some money, or if I desire to be with a person, maybe it fails. But if I have the passion, and even if I am successful in getting what I want, then there's the possibility that I don't feel like I really got what I want. Because, again, it's not what I imagined. In my imagination, I can always imagine more. So no matter how much money I get, or how much power I get, or how much I'm admired, I can always imagine having even more. And so even when I'm the richest person on earth, if I am overtaken by the passion of greed, I can still imagine being even more rich and still try to get more, right? This is a problem that happens especially with the formal passions. Because since they are not about an object at all, just about the means to get any object I want, well, these means in my imagination I can always increase. With the material passions, there's also the possibility to increase the object somewhat in my imagination, right? Like if I want to take revenge on someone, let's say I actually manage to kill him. Now my desire for revenge will probably still not be satisfied if it was a passion. And then I will maybe go on. I will now maybe imagine that I also need to kill his whole family or his whole village or whatever, to really have my revenge. And of course, if I manage to do that, I will still not feel satisfied if it's a passion. But the other possibility, specifically with the material passions, is that if I do finally get the object, I realize that the real object is not as great as the one I imagined, and that could be about the only thing to cure me of my passion. So Kant jokes that the infatuation ends 7 days after the wedding, right? I actually got together with the person I wanted, who I thought was so perfect, and then I realized it's just a normal person after all, right? Which reminds me of something my wife said, that before ever coming here to live with me, She put me on a pedestal, like I was some sort of superhuman. But then after only spending a few days with me in the same apartment, she realized that my poo also stinks when I sit on the toilet, just like everybody else's. So that's something that can cure you of especially the material passions, getting what you want and actually realizing that it's not as great and as boundless as it was in your imagination. But otherwise, the imagination can have the result that even if you get what you want, you just want more. And this is precisely why, to Kant, and here again, he's influenced by Rousseau, the passions are a problem of society, of civilization, of culture. Why, to him, the savages are probably less afflicted by passions, because there's less they can imagine for themselves, right? But once you have society, with all its luxury and maybe all its ads and commercials nowadays, there's so much stuff you can imagine having, so much possible satisfactions for possible desires you can imagine, that it is much more easy to develop passions. And of course, this is not just something that Rousseau discussed even before Kant. This is also something that later after Kant, for example, psychoanalysis found and talked about lots, right? How specifically this life and culture and civilization is what causes lots of unhappiness, lots of mental issues, because of the restrictions and also the imaginations of people. So, for example, Wilhelm Reich, one of the students of Freud, turned to the works of the ethnologist Malinowski, who had studied the indigenous people of the Trobriand Islands. And Reich discusses that these people, sure, they have crushes, or they're attracted to one another, they fall in love. And sure, sometimes this might also cause displeasure if there's a breakup or rejection, and then someone might cry or might feel unhappy and not want to eat for a day or two. But then it's fine. Okay, I've been turned down. I was unhappy briefly, but now life goes on, and maybe after a while, I fall in love with somebody else. But Reich says, based on Malinowski, what does not happen there in this society is that people get so infatuated that if they are turned down, they commit suicide, or they murder the one they wanted, or the other person that their loved one chose over them. So these unhealthy passions, they don't develop there in this more primitive, this more savage life, Reich would say. And this is something that Kant certainly would agree with. And I mean, you can reflect on yourself. What causes you unhappiness? What causes you distress in life? What unfulfilled desires are a problem to you? And then you can ask yourself how much of that is really a genuine natural desire, like you're hungry and you can't get food or whatever, and how much of it is just an imagined desire. How much of your stress, your loneliness, your unhappiness with yourself or whatever is just imagined. It's just like if you're missing a person who is away for a week or two, but you know the person is coming back, then why miss them? It's in your imagination that you are turning this into something more than it has to be. or if you're feeling so bad about your looks, or about not having fashionable clothes from some brand. Um, it's just in your imagination that this would make you oh so cool, or give you a better reputation, or everybody would like you then, and your life would be much better then, right? Or if you think you have to have certain things, certain desires, like consider sexuality. I mean, sexuality as such, okay, that's a natural desire, but how much of it is now twisted by our society or by porn? Like, I know of couples where the guy has to have anal sex, and constantly bugs his girlfriend about that, and that causes distress, this causes fights because she doesn't want that. And it's probably not a natural desire of his that he really needs to be happy. It's just that he has seen it in porn, and now he imagines that it would be so great, that maybe it would feel so much better than regular sex, which maybe it wouldn't even, if he tried it. And now he's causing fights over it, and maybe ruining his relationship for himself and for the other person. And all of that, we are so full of desires that just come out of our power of imagination, and because of how it is fed in this society, that if we just get rid of that, we get rid of quite a lot of unhappiness. And here, once again, prudence and morality align, because as I explained in the lecture on the duties towards oneself, they are all about keeping and expanding your freedom, which to Kant also very much means taking control of your own mental faculties. If your power of imagination runs wild, if you have no control over your own imagination, your own fantasies, and they are fed by ads and commercials, and they create all sorts of desires that then make you unhappy, because you cannot fulfill them, then you're not so free. And then you're not living with dignity, which is immoral. So, being able to control your own imagination and to not just let it run free is a moral duty, but at the same time, it is more prudent. It makes you more happy, or at least it prevents a lot of unhappiness. And of course, this fact that the passions come from the power of imagination is also the very reason to Kant why specifically the formal passions are the strongest ones. Because once again, since they are not about specific objects, but just about means to an object, the means in my imagination I can always increase. I can always imagine having even more independence, or more power, or more honor, or more money. I mean, rationally thinking, a billionaire should not have an issue with taxes being increased by 1 or 2%. I mean, rationally speaking, he should not have an issue with being taxed even 99%, because he would likely hardly feel it, right? Nor should someone who has that much already, like take Jeff Bezos, have a problem with people organizing and forming unions at Amazon, for example. So that maybe he has to pay them $1 or $2 per hour more. I mean, there's only so much one single person can buy with money. I mean, maybe you have a big mansion for every day of the year. So you have like 365 mansions, and you can spend every night in another mansion. At that point, how do you need another mansion? I mean, there's only so much time you have at hand to spend in your different mansions, right? Or like you already have a private island, or maybe you have 5 private islands. Do you really need to be able to buy 10? So really, even if you had like 99% taxes, you would hardly feel it. Most people don't realize how incredibly much a billion is. Just consider that a million seconds is a bit over 11 days, while a billion seconds is over 31 years. So the gap between a million and a billion is so unimaginably huge. And of course, many billionaires don't even just have 1 billion, they have hundreds of billions. So there is simply no reason why you should have any issue with giving most of that away. You could give most of that away and still be a multimillionaire. So clearly, the problem is imagination. Kant says, I can always imagine wanting more, even if I don't want it right now. Like maybe I do have my private island and I'm perfectly fine with that. So technically, I could give up most of my money and not be able to buy other private islands, but I can always imagine maybe in the future wanting another private island. So better not give up my money. And therefore, this imagination, this completely boundless imagination, especially boundless when it's about the formal means of fulfilling possible desires, that is the problem. And so, to conclude it all, we should rein in both our affections and our passions. Neither our feelings nor our desires, even if as such they are okay, should be allowed to ever get out of hand. This morality dictates, but this is also the advice of prudence that would spare us a lot of unhappiness. And I hope with this you see what I already previously said, that Kant is not an enemy of sensuality. He's not an enemy of the senses. He is not for us becoming robots or living in complete asceticism or whatever, but just for rationally governing our sensual side. He says feelings are okay, desires are okay, just affections and passions that take over are not. And specifically when it comes to the passions, right? With my last point, that the passions are born not out of the senses, right? The problem is not the sensual desire. It's not wanting to live or wanting to eat or wanting to have sex or whatever. Animals have these desires and don't develop passions, Kant says. No, the problem is the power of imagination, increasing it to a boundless degree. So you see that Kant is not the enemy of the senses. If anything, he's the advocate of the senses. He is speaking for the senses, and he's saying the mere imagination should not take over the senses. Stick to your actual sensual feelings and desires. This is, again, not exactly a positive path to happiness, but it is a negative path to happiness, meaning it prevents a lot of unhappiness in life. And that is what Kant's teaching of happiness mostly is. It is mostly negative. It is mostly about how we can prevent unhappiness, how we can prevent displeasure. So it does also have a positive part about how we can create happiness out of acting, not out of passively indulging, but out of acting. But this I will address soon in another lecture. For now, the next lecture will take off where I'm stopping here. Namely, I will talk about Kant's, you could say, Stoicism, how he is influenced by the ancient Stoics and how, just like them, he is saying we should be masters of ourselves and should have a certain independence from our feelings, from our desires, from everything sensual in ourselves, which of course is precisely how we deal with having affections and passions, or rather how we manage not having them. That is what I want to discuss next. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenku Bilay Altu, Thomas Deuringer, Kim Giamatti, Ellen Hansen, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.